Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Lahey, or Chris Kashani, and I'm a graduate teaching assistant in the Communication Studies Department. Today, we're going to discuss how to use generative AI to empower first-year students. A brief overview of my discipline and department is that our discipline is very interdisciplinary, and our department is really pioneering us as a discipline to be more intersectional and social justice oriented. We take an interdisciplinary approach, blending various perspectives, including but not limited to linguistics, psychology, and philosophy. In short, communication studies allows us to explore and investigate social, cultural, and rhetorical phenomenon across infinite contexts, highlighting the complex and ongoing process of communication and exploring notions of power and positionality in both theory and practice. So a little bit about my teaching philosophy. In theory, I kind of pull from a few different modes of thinking: critical communication pedagogy, performance pedagogy, and engaged pedagogy. And what that looks like in practice is basically, again, reiterating being very social justice oriented and considering voices that have been historically and politically erased, oppressed, and or otherwise marginalized. I also emphasize student agency and advocacy, which we'll talk a little bit more later. On the surface, this means collaborating with students on the course syllabus, assignments, lesson plans, you name it, acknowledging their individual and collective needs, both academically and professionally. In my opinion, this type of collaboration is extremely helpful for GE classes with students from diverse academic backgrounds. Calling back to my interest in performance pedagogy, I believe effective teaching is adaptable and improvisational. Otherwise, going more into what it means to be engaged in the classroom, my approach to teaching is more invested in class discussions over lectures. As much as I love lecturing, students do not. They value variety, so I provide that through discussions, activities, workshops, again, you name it, alongside lectures which cater to their needs, not mine. Ultimately, I believe lectures can reinforce power dynamics that discourage student engagement and hinder overall learning. Class activities are my bread and butter. Again, going back to that performance pedagogy, they embody what we're learning, fostering community application and playfulness, key ingredients to creating an engaging learning environment. And last but not least, experimentation that is shame-free. My classroom offers a space for learning without fear of punishment, specifically in regards to generative AI. Many new students likely face discouragement from using it in high school, particularly in the public education system. Meanwhile, private schools jumped on that bandwagon ASAP. This lack of adoption in public schools hinders application-based learning and opportunities for students to learn how to responsibly and effectively use generative AI. So why Gen AI? The good news, as a few people have mentioned previously, it's not going to replace our jobs anytime soon. Students prefer that human interaction. And also, obviously, that number is growing as to how many people are using it, but they don't use it as much as we think. It's nowhere near as much as we think. For instance, UC Davis recently conducted a self-reported study on their campus, which revealed only 60% of students have used generative AI at least once in the past year. And the way students are using generative AI is very specific and limited out of fear of punishment or getting caught. At work, things are very different. A global study found 71% of men between the ages of 18 and 24 use generative AI frequently compared to roughly 59% of women of the same age range. Now, we can attribute this to obvious power dynamics of sexism and hierarchies in and out of the workforce, add layers of other identity markers such as race, sexuality, and disability, and I guarantee these differences and disparities become more concerning and apparent. These emerging statistics let us know students aren't using it as much as they need to be once they're in the workforce, and that there is less shame in using it at work than at school. As for the concerning decline in student literacy and competency that we're all pretty well aware of at this point, generative AI helps fill in some of those gaps. I can't speak for everyone, but I constantly find myself in damned if I do, damned if I don't scenarios where I have to decide whether to utilize our limited class time and resources to catch students up to speed or fully immerse them in our classroom curriculum. It always feels like a losing battle no matter what I pick. Moving on to the state of public education. What does it say that the largest education system in the US has dramatically low enrollment? I'll give you a hint. It's not just because of COVID. 1 in 3 jobs no longer require a college degree. Let that sink in. Not just any jobs, but high-skilled jobs. At Google, Apple, Microsoft, I anticipate this number to only get bigger. largely due to public education's constantly being 10 to 20 years behind. Current trends show students prefer trade schools over traditional schools. Our job market is extremely uncertain and unstable. Students need reassurance and more application-based learning, and that's where generative AI comes in. So let's talk about how to approach AI in the classroom through the three pillars of policy, practice, and dialogue. In terms of policy, be clear with your syllabus. State your AI policy. State your university policy. Are they complementary? Are they contradictory? Figure it out. You also need to redefine plagiarism using specific examples and real-world examples. Students are over the copy-paste formula of that plagiarism section in the syllabus. It's not good at getting them to avoid plagiarizing when there's the hypocrisy right in their face. In my syllabus, I provide students with clear examples of what plagiarism looks like with or without generative AI, along with why they should care about plagiarism by connecting it to real-world context, such as selling illegal Disney merch on your Etsy shop. Stress the importance of personal integrity, not academic integrity. Allow students a space to practice using generative AI in the classroom, out of the classroom. Give them a choice to use it. We are their first point of guidance and mentorship. Personally, all my assignments encourage or at least allow the use of generative AI. It's important to specify what assignments should or shouldn't use generative AI. Dedicate time in class to address and discuss the benefits and limitations. You don't have to have all the answers. In fact, some students are likely to know more than you. That's why it's so important to be humble and collaborative. A little prep goes a long way, so locate how students might find this useful or where they might run into some obstacles if they choose to use it. Again, make sure it's optional. Don't force them to use it, but don't entirely omit it from the classroom curriculum if you can. Help them understand how to use it ethically and effectively. Lastly, encourage ongoing conversation through dialogue. This could mean negotiating how they are graded or what they are graded on. Ask them what they think is ethical or unethical. I'd recommend doing this through anonymous hard copy surveys. It just provides a little bit more honesty and transparency and helps you understand where your students are at. A bit of a rhetorical question, but feel free to sound off in the chat. What do we think is the most important thing on this slide? There was one big important takeaway. I'll give you a second. You can type it in the chat. Vulnerability. We cannot expect students to be vulnerable and self-disclose through discussion boards or class discussions if we are not willing to share in that same vulnerability. Shame is not exclusive to generative AI. Shame is subtle and explicit, imposed and self-inflicted. Shame looks like calling out a student in front of the entire class. Shame looks like not turning in an assignment on time and missing class for the rest of the semester. Shame looks like judging students for missing more than 2 classes or lying about a death in the family. Shame wears many faces, and yours is one of them. Consider how you overcome shame as a person. Consider how you will actively avoid shaming students and help them overcome their own struggles with shame. This level of vulnerability empowers students to ask, to take risks, and to learn through failure. Some examples through coursework. Here are 2 examples. The first is an assignment that I have in my public speaking class, where basically I have them analyze a 6 to 10-minute video from a list I've provided. They're allowed to use AI, but must cite it at the bottom of their paper. I have a few citation formats I've been playing around with, none of which are really satisfactory, but this is one of them. And I so far only had a few students use generative AI, at least that they've cited. I had one student I speculated had used it. Again, I stress, can't confirm, can't deny. Ultimately, they had to resubmit the assignment because they summarized it, they didn't analyze it, so it's fine, it all worked out. I'm not concerned with cheaters, and you shouldn't be either. Cheaters are going to cheat, and they're going to learn the hard way somewhere else, but not with me. The classroom is a space for learning, not policing. If students can't fail here, where else are they allowed to? In my same public speaking class, I also dedicate 2 weeks to research, which includes workshops, discussions, and lectures on generative AI. This is the first class activity I use to introduce them to the idea of generative AI. reminding them that it's entirely optional and it does not affect their grading or performance in the class whether or not they choose to use generative AI in the classroom. This second prompt that I've used, create an outline for a 12-minute informative speech, simultaneously engages their upcoming informative speech assignment, utilizes the textbook, and introduces them to prompt engineering. Between these examples, there are many ways to acknowledge and implement these tools in our classroom. Ideally, I would recommend providing several opportunities to discuss and experiment. A brief mention on the first day or last day of class defeats the purpose entirely. You might as well just not use generative AI or center it in the classroom. Thank you. These are the 4 takeaways. Walk away from anything in this presentation, I hope it's these 4 things. Start with your syllabus and create mutual dialogue with your students. Use generative AI to augment students' skills that they lack so you don't feel like you have to catch them up to speed. For instance, public speaking may not be your forte or the class that you teach, but you can still reinforce those skills if you have a presentation-based final or assignment in the class. And this is especially true for skills that you don't feel familiar or comfortable with. And lastly, centering vulnerability and integrity. It cultivates shame-free spaces where students are allowed to fail in order to succeed. Thank you.